Oh, a couple of remarks to make about this transport before we change the belts. This is actually the same transport that appears in some Yamahas. I've got a couple of MT100s, or the 120s anyway. It's got the same transport in them. They look different because where the motor is orientated, like they've got a different bracket, but the chassis underneath is the same. And this is a system where one motor is driving everything. You've got two belts, one flat belt that's going to the flywheel to turn the capstan. This square section belt is going to a wheel here, and that's turning the take up and supply reels. And then the change of mode from play, fast forward or wind, whether the head is in the up or down position or in between for play, pause, stop. Again, the momentum from that is coming from the same motor, but we've got two solenoids in here, and the logic, the CPU in response to the piano touch buttons is sending information to here. Depending on what solenoid is enabled, then some teeth at the bottom of this flywheel turn these gears, and that will raise and lower the head, etc, etc. The reel system, that's teeth, gears, cogs, whatever you want to call it, is how that reel system interfaces with these. So there's no idler tires there. We've just got this capstan belt and this reel belt. Shooting this out of sequence, a couple of things I forgot to say. And that was about belt size. Capstan belt, approximately 125mm folded length for the capstan belt, and the square section belt was approximately 115mm folded length. So in order to access them, we've got two screws on either side of this thrust plate that's keeping this flywheel in place. That needs to be removed. Also, unfortunately, it's very difficult to get that reel belt off without removing this board here, and that's a lot more awkward. What I'll definitely do now is unplug this cable. This cable comes off at both ends. So we'll start by taking the plate off. You can see that there are small screws on both sides, so I'm using the smaller of the sizes of screwdriver for this, and that's what the screw looks like out, and then that'll lift off. If I lift this out, that's the cog at the base of this flywheel that I was talking about. Be very careful about how you put this back in. The orientation of these white cogs that interface with that, if you screw around with that while you're changing belt, then you can get an error when you reassemble the transport. Basically, you'll hear a repeated clicking, and then it'll come up ERR on the display because the logic system's confused by what's happening. And I haven't absolutely got to the bottom of it. All I know is that it is very sensitive to the position of these two being in the right place, and I can't find any documentation anywhere on how to get around that. That is something I'll cover in more detail another time, but yeah, don't screw around with the head position or moving any of these cogs when you're changing this belt. Notice as well that when I removed that flywheel, there's this little plastic clip on the far side that goes over the capstan. I think it's just designed to prevent dust from going down into the shaft here, so it goes on this side here. So remember to put that back on when you refit the flywheel. I'm actually going to take this flywheel out just now, just to make sure that I don't move any of these cogs or anything by accident. I think sometimes when you see YouTube videos of people with Yamahas and they've got this clicking problem, it's because they've been rotating the flywheel while they change the capstan belt. So yeah, you can see that you can't really get this reel belt off, so unfortunately we're going to have to remove this. You see there are two small screws. That might actually be enough, because taking it off up here is a bit awkward. There's a risk of putting strain on the wires that connect the solenoids to the circuit board. So let's see if this is going to give us enough leeway. I can't actually remember. See, these are the same size as a screwdriver, but they're significantly longer, the screws that come out. And what I'm hoping is there's enough flex there. I'm not liking that. We are going to have to remove these, I think. I think that's the safest way to do it. So there's this black plate at the top. There's 1, 2, 3 screws. They're little shorties like that came out the side of the two plates. Okay, then that was going to come off like that. Now these two sensors, this is your record arm sensor and this is your cassette detection sensor. They're going to slide back slightly, but you see how these wires are going to these two solenoids, so we don't want to disturb them too much. Notice as well that the transistors that are used to sense rotation of the reels are going into holes beside the reels on the thing on this plastic chassis below. So now I can get this belt off there. I'll say this was a stretched old one, I wanted to put on a new one. And then I could hook on the new one and reattach this. So first of all, I'd want to make sure that these sensor transistors are lined up with these holes, and also that these switches are lined up with their slots. And you also want to make sure that there's a little switch there where my fingertip is. There's a white plastic lever there that needs to be below that switch. It needs to be able to shut. So yeah, I mean, this is on the grand scheme of things quite the hairy one in terms of how easy or difficult or nerve-wracking it is to change the belts. What I'd suggest is maybe getting these screws back on first before putting on the black clip along here. Okay, so that plate's back on. I cut the cable tie that was holding this onto the plate just because it was going to make it a little bit more awkward. If this part of the flywheel comes off, you can see that there are these two pegs here that fit into slots. And I'm going to drop this down again without turning it, just in case this logic system shits the bed and gives me a error message. So I want to fit this without turning that belt too much. Then I put this plate back on such that this plastic part is pushing against the pin of the flywheel, stopping it from dropping. And then once I've got these screws back in the two holes, that should be me fine again, and I can just retrace my steps backwards in order to reinstall the transport into the Marantz. I won't bother to film that. You know how to turn a screwdriver, presumably.